On a sunny Sunday morning, a billionaire CEO hears the familiar chime of his doorbell. Expecting nothing more than his usual mail, he opens the grand doors of his mansion, only to be met with a sight that would change his life forever. The sun poured into Jonathan Ashford's modern mansion, its sleek lines and endless glass panels reflecting the calm of a Sunday morning. He leaned back in his designer armchair, sipping a perfectly brewed espresso and savoring the rare silence. His newspaper lay folded on the side table, the headline boasting his latest business triumph: Ashford Holdings breaks records again. The empire he had spent decades building was thriving, and on days like this, he allowed himself a fleeting moment of pride. Jonathan's Sundays were sacred, a respite from endless board meetings, demanding investors, and late-night strategy sessions. He reveled in the solitude of his pristine home, its quiet broken only by the occasional hum of automated systems or the chirping of birds outside. The doorbell rang. He glanced at the clock, frowning. 9:12 a.m. The mail, he thought. It had to be. His Sunday edition of the Financial Post often arrived slightly late, much to his irritation. He rose, smoothing the creases of his crisp linen shirt, and strode to the door. As the sleek, automated door slid open, Jonathan froze. There, on his marble doorstep, sat a small crib. Inside was a baby, no older than a few months, wrapped snugly in a soft blue blanket. A tiny hand peeked out, clutching the corner of the fabric, and a pair of curious blue eyes stared up at him. Tucked between the folds of the blanket was a white envelope with a single handwritten line on the front: Jonathan Ashford. For the first time in years, Jonathan was speechless. He glanced around, expecting to see someone, a nanny, a prankster, anyone, but the long driveway stretching to the mansion's front gate was deserted. The estate's security cameras would have picked up anyone entering the property, yet here was this baby, dropped at his doorstep like an Amazon package. He bent down, gingerly lifting the envelope. With trembling hands, he tore it open. The letter inside was brief, written in neat cursive: "This is your son, Michael. Take care of him." Jonathan stared at the words, his mind racing. His son? Impossible. He prided himself on his meticulousness in both business and personal affairs. How could something like this slip through the cracks? The baby let out a small gurgle, breaking his train of thought. Jonathan looked down at the child, who was now watching him with wide, trusting eyes. His tie, hanging loose around his neck, caught the baby's attention. Before Jonathan could react, a tiny fist shot out and grabbed it. "Hey!" he started, but his voice faltered as the baby giggled, a sound so pure and joyous that it disarmed him completely. For a moment, Jonathan just stood there, staring at the small hand clutching his tie. The baby's laughter was infectious, and despite himself, the corners of his mouth twitched upward. But then reality set in. He had no idea what to do with a baby. He barely knew what to do with free time. "Okay, Michael, is it?" he muttered, awkwardly crouching to pick up the baby. Michael fit snugly in his arms, his tiny weight both comforting and terrifying. Jonathan had carried billion-dollar deals on his shoulders, but this felt entirely different. Michael squirmed, letting out a tiny squeal, and Jonathan panicked. Was he hungry? Cold? Tired? He had no idea what any of these noises meant. He adjusted his hold, trying to cradle the baby as he'd seen people do in movies, but it felt unnatural. His grip tightened instinctively as Michael wobbled slightly, and the baby's face scrunched up as if on the verge of crying. "Oh no, don't do that," Jonathan said quickly. "Look, we'll figure this out, okay? Just don't cry." Michael stared at him for a moment, then let out another delighted laugh. Jonathan exhaled in relief, though the knot in his stomach refused to loosen. He carried the baby inside, carefully placing the crib in the living room. His meticulously arranged furniture, a custom Italian sofa, a glass coffee table, and a minimalist bookshelf, looked absurd with a baby crib parked in the center. Jonathan sat down and ran a hand through his hair, staring at the envelope. "This is your son." The words repeated in his mind, a mantra he couldn't shake. Who could have left him here? He hadn't been in a serious relationship in years, and his casual flings were just that, casual. None of them had ever hinted at a child, let alone dropped one on his doorstep. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah, his unflappable assistant. If anyone could help him untangle this mess, it was her. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford," Sarah answered, her voice calm as ever. "Sarah," he said, his voice unusually tight. "I need you to come over. Now." There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "No," Jonathan said bluntly. He glanced at Michael, who had started gnawing on the edge of his blanket. "There's a baby here." Another pause. "A baby?" "Yes, a baby. Someone left him on my doorstep." "Right. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Jonathan hung up and turned his attention back to Michael. The baby had managed to kick off his blanket and was now trying to grab his own foot, his tiny face scrunched in concentration. Jonathan couldn't help but smile. "Michael, huh?" he said, leaning closer. "You've certainly turned my morning upside down." Michael cooed in response, as if pleased with himself. Jonathan sighed and leaned back, pinching the bridge of his nose. His quiet Sunday had officially ended, replaced by a mystery he had no idea how to solve. For now, though, he had one immediate goal: figure out how to keep this tiny human alive until Sarah arrived. He glanced at the crib and then back at Michael. "How hard can it be?" he muttered. As Michael let out a small hiccup, Jonathan had a sinking feeling that he was about to find out. Jonathan paced the living room, phone in one hand, a baby bottle in the other. Michael sat in his crib, watching him with wide, curious eyes. The baby's earlier laughter had given way to soft, impatient coos, which Jonathan interpreted as a warning. He didn't have much time before those sounds turned into full-blown wails. "Sarah, where are you?" Jonathan muttered into the phone, glancing at the clock. 2 minutes away," Sarah's calm voice replied. "Just breathe, Mr. Ashford." "Breathe?" Jonathan echoed. "There's a baby here who might be hungry, or tired, or something. I don't know what I'm doing." Michael let out a sudden, high-pitched squeal, startling Jonathan so much that he almost dropped the bottle. He fumbled to steady it and turned back to the crib. "Hang up and deal with the baby," Sarah said, amusement lacing her voice. "I'll be there before you know it." The line disconnected, and Jonathan stared at Michael, who was now holding a foot in his tiny hand, his giggles sounding oddly triumphant. Jonathan sighed and knelt beside the crib. "All right, buddy," he said, holding up the bottle like it was a peace offering. "You win. Let's see if this is what you want." He awkwardly picked Michael up, holding him stiffly as if the baby were made of porcelain. Michael squirmed in his arms, reaching for the bottle. Jonathan tilted it toward him, only to have a tiny fist knock it aside. Formula dribbled onto his shirt, and Michael began to fuss, his face scrunching up. "No, don't do that," Jonathan pleaded, his voice edging toward panic. "I'll get it right, I swear." The sound of the doorbell saved him. Jonathan rushed to answer it, still holding the squirming baby. Sarah stepped in, her sharp navy pantsuit and precise ponytail making her look every bit the polished professional she was. "Oh, thank God," Jonathan said, thrusting Michael toward her like a lifeline. "Do something." Sarah raised an eyebrow but took the baby with practiced ease. "Hello to you too, Mr. Ashford." Michael immediately settled in her arms, his cries fading into soft gurgles. He reached for Sarah's ponytail, earning a small smile from her. Jonathan stared, dumbfounded. "How do you do that?" he asked, exasperated. "Years of babysitting cousins," she replied. "Now, where's his stuff?" "Stuff?" Sarah gave him a pointed look. "Diapers? Wipes? Clothes? Formula?" Jonathan hesitated. "Well, there's a bottle, but he doesn't seem to like it. And there's a blanket." Sarah sighed, balancing Michael on one hip as she surveyed the room. "Right. First things first, diaper check." Jonathan's stomach dropped. "Diaper check? You don't think he's just crying for no reason, do you?" Before Jonathan could protest, Sarah laid Michael on the couch and expertly removed the baby's diaper, revealing a mess that made Jonathan recoil in horror. "Oh no," he muttered, backing away. "Absolutely not. Grow up, Mr. Ashford," Sarah said, unfazed. She made quick work of the situation, cleaning Michael up with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 100 times before. "You're going to have to learn how to do this." Jonathan watched in disbelief. "I run a multi-billion-dollar corporation, Sarah. I don't have time for this." "Then make time," she replied, snapping the fresh diaper into place. "You're his father now. He comes first." Her words hit harder than he expected. Jonathan looked at Michael, now cooing contentedly in his clean diaper. The tiny human he barely knew had already upended his entire world, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of chaos. Sarah, ever efficient, returned with bags of baby supplies, rattling off instructions while Jonathan tried, and mostly failed, to keep up. "Formula goes here," she said, pointing to the sterilized bottles on the counter. "This is the baby monitor. And these," she added, holding up a small onesie covered in cartoon dinosaurs, "are for bedtime." Jonathan squinted at the onesie. "He's going to wear that." "Yes, Mr. Ashford. Babies wear clothes." "Does it come in black?" Sarah sighed, handing him the onesie. "Try putting it on him." Jonathan hesitated but took the garment, holding it up like it might bite him. He sat down with Michael, who immediately started kicking his legs in protest. "Okay, buddy," Jonathan muttered. "Let's figure this out." It took 3 tries, 1 misplaced snap, and a lot of baby giggles before Michael was finally dressed. Jonathan slumped back against the couch, exhausted but oddly triumphant. "Not bad," Sarah said, a rare note of approval in her voice. "Not bad?" Jonathan repeated, gesturing to himself. "I'm covered in baby formula and spit up. I'm a disaster." "You're trying," Sarah said simply. "That's what matters." By evening, Jonathan was more tired than he could remember being in years. He sat on the couch with Michael resting against his chest, the baby's tiny breaths soft and steady. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now, not empty, but full of something he couldn't quite name. Michael stirred, his little hand clutching at Jonathan's shirt. Jonathan looked down at him, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're a lot of work, kid," he murmured. "But I think I can handle it." For the first time, he believed it. The next morning, Jonathan woke to the sound of soft babbling. It took him a moment to remember why his once silent mornings had changed. Blinking the sleep from his eyes, he glanced over at the crib near his bed and saw Michael staring at him, clutching a stuffed giraffe that Sarah had brought over. "Morning, kid," Jonathan mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. Michael's response was a giggle, his tiny arms waving enthusiastically as if to greet the new day. Jonathan chuckled despite himself. "You're definitely a morning person." He stretched and got up, feeling the weight of the previous day settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just the exhaustion of navigating diapers and bottles, it was the unanswered questions. Who had left Michael on his doorstep? Why now? And why hadn't he known about him before? Those questions loomed large as Jonathan went about their new morning routine. Michael's cheerful gurgles were a stark contrast to the unease gnawing at the back of Jonathan's mind. By the time Sarah arrived, as punctual as ever, Jonathan had made up his mind. "I need answers," he said firmly as she stepped into the kitchen, carrying a fresh set of supplies. Sarah arched an eyebrow. "About Michael?" "About his mother," Jonathan clarified. "And why she left him here without a word. I can't just move forward without knowing." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have anyone in mind who could help?" "I know a guy," Jonathan replied. "He's the best in the business." That same afternoon, Jonathan made the call. The private investigator, a sharp and resourceful man named Victor Hayes, agreed to take the case immediately. Jonathan handed over the letter and asked Victor to start digging. "You'll have everything I can find within a week," Victor promised, his tone confident. The waiting was agony. In the meantime, Jonathan did his best to adjust to life with Michael, but questions about the boy's past were never far from his mind. Nights were the hardest, when the house was quiet, and Michael was asleep in his crib. Jonathan often found himself staring at the ceiling, replaying the words from the letter, "This is your son, Michael. Take care of him." Who had written it? Why had they chosen him? And why had they believed he was capable of raising a child when he wasn't sure of it himself? A week later, Victor called. His voice was calm but laced with urgency. "I've got what you're looking for. Can we meet?" Jonathan agreed immediately, arranging for Sarah to watch Michael while he drove to Victor's office downtown. Victor greeted him with a thick manila folder. "The answers are in here," he said, handing it over. "But I'll summarize the important parts." Jonathan nodded, gripping the folder tightly as Victor began. "The woman who arranged to have Michael left at your door was named Rachel Lawson," Victor said. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Jonathan's breath caught. Rachel Lawson? He hadn't heard that name in years. Memories of late nights studying, laughing over bad coffee, and stolen kisses in the library came rushing back. Rachel had been his college girlfriend, the only woman he had ever truly loved. But their lives had taken different paths, his driven by ambition, hers by a desire for simplicity. They had parted ways amicably, or so he thought. "She passed away 3 months ago," Victor continued, his voice softer now. "Cancer. She had no family left, and based on the records I found, she knew she didn't have long." Jonathan sank into the chair, the weight of Victor's words pressing down on him. Rachel was gone. The woman who had once meant everything to him had been fighting a battle he hadn't even known about. He remembered a fleeting night a little over a year ago, where he had reunited with her in an attempt to reconnect with the past. Never in his wildest dreams did he think she might have gotten pregnant then, and even more that she could have kept it from him. "She left this letter for you," Victor added, pulling out a second envelope. "It explains everything." Hands trembling, Jonathan opened the envelope. The letter was written in Rachel's unmistakable handwriting, neat, precise, and full of emotion. "Jonathan, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving Michael in this way, but I didn't know who else to turn to. You and I had our differences, but I never doubted that you were a good man. Michael needs someone who can provide for him, someone who can love him as much as I do. I never told you about him because I thought it would complicate your life, and for that I'm sorry. But now, I'm asking you to do the impossible, to step into a role you never expected. I believe in you, Jonathan. I know you'll do what's right for him. Take care of our son. Love him for both of us." Jonathan's vision blurred as he read the final lines. He blinked hard, setting the letter down. His heart ached with a mix of grief, guilt, and an unexpected surge of determination. "She trusted me," he murmured, more to himself than to Victor. "She believed I could do this." Victor nodded. "From what I found, she didn't leave anything to chance. She made sure Michael would end up with you, even if it wasn't the conventional way." Jonathan sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the truth settling in. Rachel had made a choice, a final, selfless act to ensure Michael's future. And now, that choice had brought Jonathan face to face with a responsibility he couldn't ignore. When he returned home, Sarah was waiting with Michael in her arms. She took one look at Jonathan's face and knew. "You found out," she said gently. Jonathan nodded, his gaze shifting to Michael, who reached out to him with a wide, toothless grin. Jonathan took him from Sarah's arms and held him close, his chest tightening. "She's gone," he said quietly, the words catching in his throat. "But she wanted me to take care of him. She believed I could." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "And she was right. You've already started." Jonathan looked down at Michael, who was now playing with his tie again, giggling as if everything in the world was perfectly simple. For the first time, Jonathan didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt a spark of purpose, ignited by Rachel's faith in him. He smiled at Michael, his voice steady and filled with resolve. "Don't worry, buddy. I've got you. We're in this together." Jonathan's life had taken on a new rhythm, one that revolved around bottles, bedtime stories, and Michael's increasingly energetic babbling. The mansion, once a quiet fortress of solitude, now echoed with the sounds of toys rattling, baby giggles, and the occasional bout of crying. For the first time in years, Jonathan found himself waking up not to the buzz of his alarm clock but to the delighted squeals of his son. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. Jonathan no longer hesitated to pick Michael up, no longer flinched when his suits got covered in formula or spit up. It was messy, chaotic, and completely unlike the meticulously ordered life he had always lived, but it was becoming his new normal. That normal, however, was shattered one morning when Jonathan opened his front door to find a group of photographers standing just outside the gate, their cameras clicking furiously. "Mr. Ashford! Is it true you've adopted a baby?" one shouted. "Who's the mother, Jonathan?" another asked, pushing a microphone toward him. Caught off guard, Jonathan slammed the door and leaned against it, his heart racing. How had they found out? He turned to Sarah, who was feeding Michael in the kitchen. "We've got a problem," he said, running a hand through his hair. Sarah glanced up. "Let me guess, the media? They're outside my gate," Jonathan said, still trying to process the scene. "How do they even know?" Sarah sighed, setting Michael's bottle down. "You're one of the most high-profile people in the country. It was only a matter of time before someone leaked the story. You have a baby now, Jonathan. That's newsworthy." Jonathan groaned, pacing the room. "Great. Just great. As if I didn't have enough to deal with." The paparazzi didn't leave. In fact, they multiplied. By the afternoon, drones were circling the property, and Jonathan had to instruct security to tighten measures around the estate. But the real test came when he ventured outside with Michael for a routine doctor's appointment. He had barely stepped out of the car, Michael snug in his arms, when the paparazzi descended. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and a crowd gathered to catch a glimpse of the billionaire and his son. Michael, startled by the chaos, began to cry. Jonathan shielded him, glaring at the photographers. "Back off!" he barked, his voice cutting through the commotion. Sarah, who had accompanied them, ushered Jonathan inside the clinic. "You handled that. Well, considering," she said, her tone laced with dry humor. Jonathan sighed, bouncing Michael gently to calm him. "This is ridiculous. How am I supposed to give him a normal life with cameras following us everywhere?" "It won't last forever," Sarah assured him. "But until then, you're going to have to learn to live with it." The media frenzy continued, but something unexpected happened. As footage of Jonathan navigating fatherhood began to circulate, public perception of him started to shift. The once infamous, workaholic CEO was now being portrayed as a man trying, however clumsily, to care for his son. Clips of Jonathan struggling to open a stroller, juggling a diaper bag and a briefcase, and calming a fussy Michael during a business meeting went viral. Social media was ablaze with comments. "He's trying so hard. You have to admire that. Who knew Jonathan Ashford had a soft side? That baby is adorable. From ruthless businessman to doting dad, this is the character arc I didn't know I needed." Even late-night talk show hosts got in on the trend, poking light-hearted fun at his less-than-graceful attempts at parenting. One clip showed Jonathan accidentally putting a diaper on backward, and another captured him falling asleep with Michael sprawled on his chest during a board meeting. But alongside the jokes came genuine admiration. People were drawn to the authenticity of it all, the billionaire learning how to be a father, mistakes and all. One morning, as Jonathan scrolled through his phone while Michael napped, Sarah walked in holding a tablet. "You've officially gone viral," she said, handing it to him. Jonathan groaned. "What now?" Sarah showed him a compilation video titled, "Baby Billionaire Dad, Jonathan Ashford's Parenting Adventures." It featured clips of him tripping over baby toys, fumbling with bottles, and giving a press interview while Michael clung to his tie. The video ended with a heartwarming shot of Michael asleep in Jonathan's arms, his tiny hand clutching his father's shirt. Jonathan watched in silence, torn between embarrassment and amusement. "This is what my life has become," he said, shaking his head. "It's not so bad," Sarah said with a small smile. "People love seeing you like this. It makes you relatable." Relatable. The word felt foreign to him. Jonathan had spent his entire career cultivating an image of perfection, untouchable, invincible. But now, with Michael in his life, that image was crumbling. And surprisingly, he didn't mind. As the weeks went on, the media attention began to die down, but the public's fascination with Jonathan's journey didn't waver. Parenting blogs speculated on his daily routines, while fan accounts on social media shared updates on baby Michael's milestones. One day, as Jonathan was changing Michael's diaper, a task he had finally mastered, he looked down at his son and chuckled. "You've turned me into a meme, you know that?" Michael responded with a happy squeal, waving his arms in the air. Jonathan shook his head, unable to suppress a smile. "I guess there are worse things to be known for." Later that evening, as he sat in the living room with Michael asleep on his chest, Jonathan reflected on how much his life had changed. The mansion, once a symbol of his isolation, now felt alive. His days, once dictated by profit margins and quarterly goals, were now filled with diaper changes, bedtime stories, and endless moments of unexpected joy. Jonathan glanced at Sarah, who was typing away on her laptop nearby. "Do you think I'm doing okay?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. She looked up, surprised by the question. "I think you're doing more than okay," she said. "You're trying. And that's what matters." Jonathan nodded, his gaze returning to Michael. For the first time in years, he felt something he couldn't put into words, something warm, steady, and deeply fulfilling. He kissed the top of Michael's head and whispered, "Thanks for choosing me, buddy." Life with Michael had settled into a chaotic, joyous rhythm. The paparazzi had mostly moved on, leaving Jonathan to navigate fatherhood without the constant glare of the media. He was getting better at juggling board meetings and diaper changes, though his employees had grown used to hearing baby babble during conference calls. One afternoon, Jonathan was in his study, sorting through a stack of baby photos Sarah had printed for him. Michael sat in his playpen nearby, happily banging on his xylophone. The peaceful moment was interrupted by Sarah's voice from the doorway. "Jonathan," she said, her tone unusually serious. "We need to talk." He looked up, immediately on alert. "What is it?" Sarah stepped into the room, holding a manila envelope. "This arrived earlier today. It's from a lawyer representing Eleanor Carter." Jonathan frowned. "Who's Eleanor Carter?" "Apparently, she's a cousin of Rachel's," Sarah explained, handing him the envelope. "And she's claiming she has a right to custody of Michael." Jonathan's heart sank as he read through the contents. Eleanor's petition argued that a single, workaholic billionaire was unfit to raise a child and that she, as Rachel's closest living relative, would provide a more stable environment. But buried in the legalese were hints that Eleanor's motivations weren't entirely noble, mentions of Michael's inheritance, and the trust fund Jonathan had established for him. "She's after the money," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "This isn't about Michael." "Most likely," Sarah agreed. "But the courts won't see it that way unless we can prove it. You need a strong legal team." Jonathan's first call was to Victor Hayes, the private investigator who had uncovered Rachel's story. "Dig into Eleanor Carter," he instructed. "I want to know everything about her, her finances, her past, everything." His second call was to the best family lawyer he could find, Margaret Hale. Known for her unorthodox methods and sharp wit, Margaret had a reputation for winning even the most challenging cases. When Margaret arrived at Jonathan's mansion the next day, she wasted no time getting to the point. A petite woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, she carried a battered leather briefcase and spoke with the confidence of someone who had seen it all. "So, you're the billionaire with the baby," Margaret said, eyeing him critically. "Let me guess, you want to keep the kid, But you have no idea how to prove you're a good dad. Jonathan bristled. I'm doing my best. Good, she said, plopping her briefcase onto the coffee table. Because Eleanor Carter isn't going to make this easy. She's already painting you as an absentee father who's more concerned with profit margins than bedtime stories. We'll need to show the court that she's wrong. Jonathan glanced at Michael, who was gnawing on a teething ring. What do I need to do? First, we build your case, Margaret said, flipping open her briefcase. We'll gather testimonials from people who've seen you with Michael, employees, friends, anyone who can vouch for you. Second, we dig into Eleanor's background. If she's got skeletons in her closet, we'll find them. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Jonathan juggled his already demanding schedule with meetings at Margaret's office, where she grilled him on every aspect of his life with Michael. Have you missed any of his doctor's appointments? Margaret asked during one session. No, Jonathan replied. I've been at every single one. Good. And how's he doing? Jonathan smiled. He's healthy. Growing fast. Margaret nodded, jotting down notes. That's what I like to hear. Meanwhile, Victor uncovered a trail of financial troubles in Eleanor's past. Her bank statements revealed mounting debt, and there were rumors of a failed business venture that had left her desperate for cash. Armed with this information, Margaret began crafting a strategy to undermine Eleanor's claims. When the court date finally arrived, Jonathan felt a mixture of nerves and determination. He sat at the defendant's table, Margaret by his side, while Eleanor sat across the room with her lawyer. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, dressed impeccably and exuding an air of self-righteousness. Eleanor's lawyer wasted no time attacking Jonathan's character, painting him as a man too consumed by his work to be an attentive parent. He presented photos of Jonathan at corporate events and articles about his grueling work schedule as evidence of his supposed neglect. Margaret, however, was unfazed. When it was her turn, she countered with testimonials from Sarah, Michael's pediatrician, and even Jonathan's employees, all of whom described his dedication to his son. She also played a video compilation of Jonathan with Michael, feeding him, playing with him, and reading him bedtime stories. The footage painted a picture of a father who was learning, growing, and wholeheartedly committed. Mr. Ashford may not be perfect, Margaret said during her closing argument. But parenting isn't about perfection, it's about love, dedication, and the willingness to put your child's needs above your own. That's exactly what my client has done. The turning point came when Margaret presented the evidence of Eleanor's financial struggles. She revealed bank records showing that Eleanor had recently applied for a large loan and pointed out the timing of her custody petition, which coincided with the establishment of Michael's trust fund. Eleanor's composure cracked. Under cross-examination, she admitted that she was facing financial difficulties but insisted that her motives were purely out of love for Michael. Margaret, however, drove the point home with surgical precision, leaving no doubt about Eleanor's true intentions. When the judge finally delivered the ruling, Jonathan held his breath. The court finds that Mr. Ashford has demonstrated a genuine commitment to the well-being of his son. While the petitioner's concerns are noted, the evidence suggests that Mr. Ashford's home is the best environment for Michael. Custody will remain with Mr. Ashford. Jonathan exhaled, relief flooding through him. He glanced at Margaret, who gave him a rare smile. Told you we'd win, she said. That evening, back at the mansion, Jonathan held Michael close, his heart full of gratitude. He looked at Sarah, who had been an unwavering source of support throughout the ordeal. I couldn't have done this without you, he said. You're the one who made it happen, Sarah replied. Michael's lucky to have you. Jonathan kissed the top of Michael's head, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The battle had been hard-fought, but it had reaffirmed what he already knew. He would do anything for his son. Together, they were unstoppable. The ruling in Jonathan's favor marked the end of the custody battle, but he knew it was just the beginning of proving he was the father Michael deserved. As much as he had grown to love the little boy who had turned his life upside down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he still had a lot to learn. Back at the mansion, life gradually returned to normal, or as close to normal as life could get with a toddler in tow. Michael's giggles and babbling filled the house, transforming it from a cold, silent fortress into a warm, bustling home. Jonathan's days were a delicate balancing act, but for the first time in his life, his focus wasn't solely on work. It was on Michael. Jonathan made changes to his routine, scaling back his relentless work schedule to spend more time with his son. Mornings were no longer a blur of coffee and emails. They were filled with diaper changes, baby food experiments, and chasing Michael around the living room as the boy giggled uncontrollably. Evenings became story time, where Jonathan discovered that Michael's favorite book wasn't a glossy, high-tech interactive one but a simple, tattered copy of Goodnight Moon. But it wasn't always easy. Michael's energy seemed boundless, and there were days when Jonathan felt like he was barely keeping up. One morning, as he struggled to assemble a baby gate while Michael crawled toward a precariously placed vase, Sarah walked in and took one look at the scene before bursting into laughter. "Need some help, Mr. Ashford?" she asked, crossing her arms. Jonathan groaned, wiping sweat from his forehead. This was supposed to be simple. The instructions are a nightmare. Sarah knelt beside him, quickly snapping the gate into place. "You're learning," she said with a smile. "And you're doing better than you think." Jonathan wasn't so sure, but the look in Michael's eyes every time he reached for his father, trusting, joyful, gave him the strength to keep trying. The turning point came one afternoon at the office. Jonathan had brought Michael to work, as he often did now that the boy had become something of a mascot for Ashford Holdings. Employees who once feared their CEO's sharp tongue now eagerly volunteered to babysit during meetings, and the break room was stocked with toys alongside the coffee and pastries. During a quarterly strategy session, Michael toddled into the conference room, dragging a stuffed giraffe and looking up at Jonathan with wide eyes. Jonathan paused mid-presentation, a soft smile breaking across his face. "Excuse me, everyone," he said, scooping Michael into his arms. The toddler rested his head on Jonathan's shoulder, content. "Looks like my assistant needs me." The room erupted in laughter, and for the first time, Jonathan didn't feel embarrassed. He felt proud. Later that day, Sarah approached him with an envelope. Inside were handwritten notes from his employees, thanking him for showing them that even someone as driven and successful as Jonathan could prioritize family. "You've inspired a lot of people around here," Sarah said. "Myself included." Jonathan looked at the notes, his throat tight. He had spent years believing that strength meant never showing vulnerability, but Michael had taught him otherwise. When the court scheduled a final hearing to review the custody arrangement, Jonathan knew it was his chance to show not just the judge, but himself how far he had come. The courtroom was packed that day, with Sarah, his employees, and even a few of his business rivals in attendance. Jonathan stood before the judge, Michael sitting quietly on Sarah's lap in the gallery. Clearing his throat, Jonathan began. "Your Honor, I'm not going to pretend that I'm a perfect father. I didn't grow up dreaming of parenthood, and when Michael first came into my life, I was terrified. But in these past months, he's taught me more than I ever thought possible, not just about being a parent, but about being a better person." He paused, glancing at Michael, who was watching him intently. "I used to think my success was measured by numbers, profits, deals, the size of my company. But now, I see that my real success is sitting right there in that little chair. Michael has given me purpose, joy, and a kind of love I didn't know I was capable of. He's changed my life, and I want nothing more than to be the father he deserves." As Jonathan spoke, the courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed moved by his words. When he finished, he took a deep breath and returned to his seat, feeling both exposed and proud. After the hearing, Sarah approached him with Michael in her arms. "You did good," she said, handing the toddler over. Michael immediately reached for Jonathan, who held him close. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Over the next few days, Jonathan noticed a shift in the way people treated him, not as the cold, unreachable CEO, but as a father who was doing his best. Letters poured in from strangers who had followed his story, sharing their own parenting struggles and offering words of encouragement. One letter, written in shaky handwriting, stood out. It was from an elderly man who simply wrote, "You remind me of myself when I became a single father. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Keep going." Jonathan kept that letter in his desk drawer, pulling it out on the hard days. Because there were hard days when Michael refused to eat, or when a major deal went south, or when the exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. But those days were always balanced by the moments of pure joy, Michael's first wobbly steps, the way he called Jonathan, Dada, with a toothy grin, the quiet evenings when they both fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket of contentment. Jonathan had built an empire, but nothing compared to the life he was building with Michael. As he tucked his son into bed one night, he whispered, "Thank you for choosing me, buddy. I'll never stop trying to make you proud." Michael stirred, his tiny hand clutching Jonathan's finger as he drifted off to sleep. And in that moment, Jonathan knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Jonathan had just finished tucking Michael into bed, the toddler clutching his stuffed giraffe as he drifted off to sleep. The day had been long but fulfilling, and Jonathan found himself marveling at how natural this once overwhelming routine now felt. Michael had become his anchor, his reason to keep striving to be better. As he stood in the doorway of Michael's nursery, watching his son's chest rise and fall with each tiny breath, Jonathan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped out, closing the door softly, and glanced at the screen. It was Margaret. "Jonathan," she said, her voice sharp. "We need to talk. I've uncovered something about Eleanor that you need to know." Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What is it now?" "Eleanor's financial situation is worse than we thought," Margaret explained. "She's deeply in debt, and her custody claim wasn't just about Michael, it was about the trust fund. She's desperate, and she saw Michael as her way out." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "So, it was never about him. Just the money." "It looks that way," Margaret said. "But there's more. She's requested a private meeting with you." Jonathan paused, surprised. "Why?" "She claims she wants to resolve things," Margaret said. "I think you should hear her out." The next afternoon, Jonathan sat across from Eleanor in a private conference room. She was impeccably dressed, her posture stiff and defensive, but there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Margaret sat beside him, silent but watchful. "I'm not here to fight," Eleanor began, her voice wavering slightly. "I just want to talk." Jonathan crossed his arms, his expression guarded. "Then talk." Eleanor hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "I wasn't honest about my reasons for filing the custody claim. Yes, I care about Michael, he's family, but I'm struggling. I lost my job, my house is on the verge of foreclosure, and I thought if I got custody, I'd have access to the trust fund and could turn things around." Jonathan's stomach churned at her words. "You were willing to use a child to fix your finances?" he asked, his tone sharp. Eleanor flinched, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "I know how it sounds," she said quietly. "But I wasn't thinking clearly. I was desperate. Desperate enough to try and take him from the only parent he's ever known?" Jonathan shot back. "Do you have any idea what that would have done to him?" Eleanor's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I thought I was doing what was best for him," she whispered. "But seeing you with him, I realize now that I was wrong." Jonathan's expression softened, though his frustration remained. "What changed?" She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "At the hearing, I saw how much you love him. You've built your life around him in a way I never could. I wanted to believe I could give him a better life, but the truth is you already are." For a moment, the room was silent. Jonathan studied Eleanor, searching for any sign of deceit, but all he saw was a woman who had been broken by her circumstances and was finally admitting the truth. "What do you want from me, Eleanor?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I want to withdraw my claim. I won't fight you anymore." Margaret glanced at Jonathan, her eyebrows raised in surprise. but he didn't look away from Eleanor. "Why should I believe you?" Eleanor's shoulders slumped. "Because I've seen enough to know that Michael is better off with you. I don't want to hurt him, Jonathan. I just want to know he'll be okay." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this turn of events, but he could see the sincerity in Eleanor's eyes. She wasn't the villain he had painted her to be, just a flawed, desperate person who had made the wrong choices. "You have my word," Jonathan said finally. "Michael will always be okay. I'll make sure of it." Eleanor nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you." The courtroom was quiet the following day as Eleanor formally withdrew her petition. The judge acknowledged her decision and confirmed Jonathan's sole custody of Michael. As the proceedings concluded, Eleanor stood and approached Jonathan. "I meant what I said," she told him, her voice soft. "You're a good father. Better than I gave you credit for." Jonathan nodded, extending a hand. "Thank you. I hope things get better for you." She shook his hand, offering a faint smile before leaving the courtroom. Watching her go, Jonathan felt an odd mix of relief and sympathy. Her departure marked the end of a battle he hadn't asked for but had fought with everything he had. That evening, back at the mansion, Jonathan sat on the couch with Michael on his lap. The toddler was babbling incoherently, waving his giraffe in the air, oblivious to the weight of the day's events. "You're stuck with me, kid," Jonathan said with a grin, kissing the top of Michael's head. "No more interruptions. Just you and me." Michael giggled, his tiny hand patting Jonathan's cheek. In that moment, Jonathan felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had faced the challenge, proven himself as a father, and come out stronger. The future was still uncertain, but with Michael by his side, Jonathan knew he could handle anything. And for the first time in years, Jonathan Ashford wasn't just a billionaire or a CEO. He was a dad, and that was the title that mattered most. The days after the custody hearing felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from Jonathan's shoulders. For the first time in months, he didn't wake up worrying about court dates or legal battles. Instead, his mornings were filled with the happy chaos of fatherhood, Michael's babbling, toys scattered across the living room, and the smell of oatmeal that always seemed to linger after breakfast. The mansion, once a symbol of Jonathan's isolation, was unrecognizable. The sleek, minimalist decor had given way to child-proof gates, colorful rugs, and walls adorned with crayon scribbles that Jonathan couldn't bring himself to erase. Michael's laughter echoed through the hallways, transforming the cold, sterile space into a warm, lively home. One evening, as Jonathan sat on the floor assembling a set of wooden blocks for Michael, Sarah walked in, holding a tablet. She surveyed the scene, Jonathan in sweatpants, Michael giggling as he tried to stack the blocks, and raised an eyebrow. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said, setting the tablet on the table. Jonathan looked up, grinning. "What day is that?" "The day Jonathan Ashford traded his three-piece suits for baby wipes and sweatpants," she teased. He laughed, shaking his head. "It's worth it." Michael clapped his hands, clearly agreeing, and Jonathan ruffled his hair. "What's on the tablet?" he asked Sarah. "Just a proposal for the annual shareholder meeting," she said. "Also, I've scheduled a photographer to update the corporate website. We need new headshots of you." Jonathan groaned. "Please don't tell me I have to wear a suit." Sarah smirked. "Just a tie. Maybe. Oh, and you might want to bring Michael to the office again. He's become quite the morale booster." Jonathan glanced at Michael, who was now chewing on a block. "You hear that, buddy? You're a mascot." Michael responded with a delighted squeal, and Jonathan chuckled. "Fine. Let's schedule it." The next morning, Jonathan arrived at Ashford Holdings with Michael in tow. The office, once an intimidating environment of sharp suits and even sharper tempers, had become a second home for Michael. Employees greeted him like an old friend, offering high fives and snacks as he toddled through the halls. In the conference room, Jonathan balanced Michael on his hip while reviewing quarterly reports. The toddler grabbed at the papers, crumpling one with a triumphant giggle. "Michael," Jonathan said, feigning sternness. "We talked about this. No eating financial reports." The room erupted in laughter, and Jonathan couldn't help but join in. Michael had a way of breaking down walls, softening even the most serious of meetings. By lunchtime, Jonathan found himself in the break room, surrounded by employees who were taking turns entertaining Michael. One of the accountants had fashioned a paper hat for him, and Michael wore it proudly as he toddled around. "You know," Sarah said, leaning against the counter, "I think he's done more for employee morale in a few months than all of your team-building retreats combined." Jonathan smiled. "He has that effect." As the weeks turned into months, Jonathan found his balance. He learned to delegate more at work, trusting his team to handle the day-to-day operations while he focused on Michael. He discovered the joy of simple routines, reading bedtime stories, cheering Michael on as he took his first steps, and even enduring the chaos of bath time. But it wasn't just the small moments that mattered. It was the transformation within himself. Jonathan, who had once measured success in profit margins and market shares, now found his greatest achievements in Michael's laughter and the bond they shared. One sunny afternoon, Jonathan decided to take a break from work and spend the day in the garden with Michael. The estate's sprawling lawns, once meticulously manicured for appearances, had become a playground. Toys and tiny footprints dotted the grass, and the air was filled with the sound of birdsong and Michael's giggles. Jonathan chased after him, pretending to be a monster as Michael shrieked with delight and toddled away as fast as his little legs could carry him. Sarah, sitting on the patio with a cup of tea, watched the scene unfold with a smile. "You're really getting the hang of this dad thing," she called out. Jonathan paused, scooping Michael into his arms and holding him upside down, much to the toddler's delight. "Takes a good teacher," he replied, winking at her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jonathan and Michael collapsed onto the grass, both breathless from laughter. Michael climbed onto Jonathan's chest, his tiny hands patting his father's face. "Dad," he said, his voice soft but sure. Jonathan's heart swelled. He kissed Michael's forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "That's right, buddy. I'm your dad." From the patio, Sarah snapped a photo, capturing the moment. She didn't say anything, but the look on her face said it all. Jonathan had changed, and for the better. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Jonathan carried Michael inside and tucked him into bed. Sitting beside the crib, he watched as Michael's eyes fluttered shut, his breathing slow and steady. For years, Jonathan had thought he knew what fulfillment felt like. He had built an empire, achieved everything he set out to do, and amassed wealth beyond his wildest dreams. But none of it compared to this, watching his son sleep, knowing that he was loved and safe. As he turned off the light and closed the door, Jonathan felt a deep sense of peace. His life had taken a turn he never expected, but it was exactly where he was meant to be. And for the first time, Jonathan Ashford wasn't looking ahead to the next big deal, or the next milestone. He was living fully in the moment, grateful for the journey that had brought him here. And in the quiet of the night, with Michael's laughter still echoing in his heart, Jonathan knew that he was no longer just a man of success. He was a father, a title that meant more than all the others combined. Time seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. One moment, Michael was a wobbly toddler, clutching Jonathan's hand for support. The next, he was a spirited 5-year-old, running through the garden with boundless energy, his laughter filling the air. Jonathan often found himself marveling at how quickly Michael was growing, each milestone a reminder of the preciousness of the time they shared. Michael had grown into a bright, curious boy, full of questions about the world around him. "Why is the sky blue, Dad?" he'd ask during their walks in the park. "How do birds fly? Can I be a bird when I grow up?" Jonathan would smile, crouching down to Michael's level. "The sky is blue because of the way sunlight scatters, buddy. Birds fly because of their wings. And no, you can't be a bird, but you can do anything else you set your mind to." They shared countless adventures, from building elaborate pillow forts in the living room to taking weekend trips to the countryside, where Michael would chase butterflies and collect rocks he insisted were treasure. Jonathan, once a man consumed by work, now found joy in these simple moments. He learned as much from Michael's wonder and enthusiasm as Michael learned from him. As Michael's 6th birthday approached, Jonathan realized an important milestone was looming: Michael's first day of school. The thought filled him with a mix of pride and apprehension. His little boy, who had been by his side every day since the moment he arrived on the doorstep, was about to take his first steps into the world without him. The morning of Michael's first day arrived with the excitement of a holiday. Michael bounded into Jonathan's room before the alarm went off, his backpack already slung over his small shoulders. "Dad, look! I'm ready!" Michael announced, grinning from ear to ear. Jonathan chuckled, sitting up and ruffling Michael's hair. "You might be ready, but breakfast isn't. Let's go fuel up first, okay?" In the kitchen, Sarah had prepared a special breakfast, pancakes shaped like stars, Michael's favorite. As they ate, Jonathan found himself stealing glances at his son, who was chattering excitedly about the friends he was going to make and the teachers he was going to meet. "You're going to love school," Jonathan said, masking the lump in his throat. "It's a place where you'll learn so many amazing things, and you'll get to share all your adventures with me when you come home." When it was finally time to leave, Jonathan helped Michael adjust his backpack and crouched down to look him in the eye. "Remember, buddy," he said, his voice steady but soft. "You're smart, kind, and brave. Be yourself, and you'll do great." Michael nodded solemnly, then threw his arms around Jonathan's neck. "Thanks, Dad. I love you." "I love you too, kiddo," Jonathan whispered, hugging him tightly. At the school gates, Michael's excitement bubbled over as he spotted a group of children playing nearby. He turned to Jonathan, his expression a mix of nervousness and anticipation. "Do you think they'll like me?" Michael asked. Jonathan smiled, crouching down again. "Of course they will. You're amazing. Just remember to smile, and if someone looks lonely, invite them to play." Michael nodded, his confidence bolstered. He kissed Jonathan's cheek, a habit he hadn't yet grown out of, and ran toward the other children, his backpack bouncing with each step. Jonathan stood by the gate, watching as Michael joined the group, his laughter ringing out within moments. A teacher approached, gently ushering the children inside, and Michael waved enthusiastically before disappearing through the doors. As the gates closed, Jonathan felt a pang of emptiness but also an overwhelming sense of pride. His little boy was growing up, ready to take on the world with the same determination and curiosity that had brightened Jonathan's life since the day he arrived. Sarah, who had come along for support, placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "He's going to be just fine," she said gently. Jonathan nodded, his gaze still fixed on the school. "I know. But it feels like yesterday he was learning to walk. Now he's walking into school on his own." Sarah smiled. "You've done a great job, Jonathan. He's confident, happy, and loved. That's all because of you." Jonathan took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. "I just hope he knows how proud I am of him." "He does," Sarah said. "Trust me." As they turned to leave, Jonathan glanced back one last time, a small smile playing on his lips. The journey that had started with an unexpected knock on his door had led to this moment, a bittersweet goodbye at the school gates, filled with the promise of new beginnings. And in that moment, Jonathan knew that Michael was ready for this next step, and so was he. They had grown together, father and son, building a life full of love, laughter, and endless possibilities. The best was yet to come. From an unexpected knock at the door to a life transformed by love, Jonathan and Michael's journey shows that the most unplanned moments can lead to life's greatest joys. It's a story about stepping into the unknown, embracing challenges, and finding that love grows through connection, care, and commitment. As we watch Jonathan and Michael embark on this next chapter, their story reminds us to treasure the unexpected and the bonds that make life meaningful. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what unexpected moments have changed your life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and until next time, cherish the moments that truly matter.